Today we're going to look at how broadcasters are using some of the latest graphics tools to improve their newscasts and tell better stories. Joining me from my left, we have Andy Bocking, Head of Technology News for the BBC, who made a trip over. Thomas Desmeules, he's the Chief Technology Officer for Astuce Media. Michael Gruzuk, who's Senior Director of CBC News, and he is standing in at the last minute for his colleague Selena, who fell ill, and we're very happy to have him here. And at the end of the table is Victor Murphy. He's Director of Technology for WLTV First Coast News.
WTLV.
WTLV, that's true. Yeah, I can't read anymore, but it's been a long afternoon. First off, starting with Andy, what was the primary driver for doing the work you did with AR for the elections, and the extent you've used virtual sets? Was it for a new look? Were you looking for flexibility? Was it a cost consideration? Or in the U.S., those are sort of the primary questions. But what was the primary driver for you playing with AR?
I mean, AR and VR, I think, is actually how do you tell the story? And how can you change in the field as the story develops for the evening? You want different mechanisms. The way that Jeremy Vine, who's our big AR, or should we say our big presenter in these sort of things, the modern day swingometer, how he can tell that story and how he can get that across to the public and the audience in a really simple way. If you've got a fixed set and you've just got a fixed screen, it's quite difficult, and we can use different techniques, whether you're using bar graphs which are coming out of the ground or using swingometers or whatever it is. It's a really good way of actually being able to get that information across. Infographics, you might want to call it.
And when did you first play with virtual sets at BBC?
Oh crikey, that must have most probably on its the BBC's R&D department has developed a lot of this stuff very early on as part of its place in global development of broadcast technology. So we've been in it for a very long time, and I think we've almost, since it's come to fruition, I think we've almost used it in every election. It's quite interesting. I put the US one in there because that US one actually came from a very small AR studio, or VR AR studio, which we've got in Broadcasting House. It's a very small studio. It's not like the one we use on the big set. We're in Elf Street, which is massive. Right. That's actually quite small, and you can make those volumes really big. And what you didn't see in there was actually we use VR. There's actually a table which sits in that studio all the time, and it's purely covered up. You just can't see it. You can mask it out. So
cool. Going to the other end of the spectrum, national broadcaster to a mid-market station. Victor, can you talk about the development of virtual set technology at your station? You've been playing around with this stuff for a little while, but what was the primary motivation?
Well, the motivation was to be different, was to push the envelope, see what we could do differently, and just break out of the noise that's out there in the environment around. There's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of people doing a lot of different things, and for us to stand out within our market and to present ourselves in a completely different way, that was the motivation.
And if I remember, you launched Virtual Set first in conjunction with the Olympics, right? Doing
Correct.
Special programming?
Correct. For those of you familiar with NBC affiliates, they do a program called the O-Zone, which leads into the prime Olympic coverage. And most TV stations, they'll get the content that comes down from the network, they'll take the anchor, put them in front of a monitor, shoot the ins and outs, slap it together, boom, send it off to playback, and away they go. Well, my news director wanted to do something a little more aggressive and a little more flashy. And that's when I said, well, instead of a big monitor wall like she wanted, let's do some virtual reality with some augmented reality elements in there. And that first minute clip you saw, I thought was a very good indicator of how we used that set. Everything from augmented reality with the medal count to showcasing how we can put put a paid spot within that set as well. Even though it was Brandon Pest Control, nonetheless, they enjoyed being in that space.
Thomas, your reel obviously showed you work with broadcasters all over the world. Can you talk about what the take-up has been? Who's buying AR versus virtual sets, and how are stations using it?
Well, I think the one thing that's common globally is AR is definitely taking everyone by storm. It's the new over-the-shoulder, it's the new stripe, it's the new studio graphics that everyone for a while went from having the over-the-shoulder keyed on, and then it was keyed over the shoulders, and then it was the studio monitor beside the presenter. Well, now let's just make it AR and floating. I think the most important part, the one thing that came out of everyone's demo reel is that it's very practical to use as a visualization aid to see scale and relative weights of things. So that's why we're seeing the bar charts and the numbers, the types of infographics that Andy talked about, and the metal counts, and really to see that proportion. It literally jumps off the screen. So you can really get that scale of, oh wow, that is much bigger than I expected. So that's where it becomes very, very handy. And we're seeing that really everywhere around the world.
Can you talk about the relative investment relating to launching some AR elements in newscasts versus going the full virtual set route?
It's definitely a lot more cost effective to go AR. I mean, you can deploy a relatively simple thing. I mean, as long as you've got, depending on the camera tracking technology that you're using, the cameras and the rendering engine that you've got, it tends to be fairly forgiving in different lighting conditions. So we've seen it used at the CBC and BBC in very large, airy atriums that have all sorts of different environmental factors to consider. We've done some pretty cool setups at some trade shows. I mean, in the clip, you saw some stuff that was at NAB in that type of environment. Whereas going, full virtual set, well, obviously you need to be more careful with, the paint, the rooms, the surroundings, the throw of your camera, the lighting. It's much more delicate a setup, I would say.
Michael, you mentioned in the intro to your clip that you guys have played around with AR and virtual set technology, but for the rebrand of the National, which is your evening newscast, you decided to go in a different direction, and you had some editorial reasons for that. Can you elaborate, I guess?
We did a very deep analysis of where the graphic experience was in media across North America and Western Europe, and we're seeing a lot of trends in print actually that we were more inspired by in terms of where there was what we would call white space, where there was opportunity for us in the market. We're a public broadcaster, and we want to differentiate ourselves, and we are differentiated. We have a high value for the Canadian population as a trusted news source. And when we looked closely at a lot of the technology that was available to us, the color palettes, the font choices, the tickers and banners and different sorts of options, we made the bold decision to move in the opposite direction of where everybody else is, because our main news channel and a lot of our newscasts were looking identical, and we're not a differentiator in the market. So you can choose to differentiate by being incredibly bold. We choose to differentiate by being boldly simple. And the audience has noticed in ways that astounded me to see audience reaction where people were thanking us for simplicity. And I'm not talking about our older audience, I'm talking about younger audience actually, where they are grateful that we've moved away from some of the conventions. It's risky. We're only 1 month into this. I'm not opposed at all to AR, and for our next election 2019, I hope that we'll be working together. And I haven't told you this, but our new set that we built for the National is incredibly simple, and we made sure that we built in certain platform areas and walls so that we could move when the story dictated, we could move to a place where we presented something with some AR. Very interested in the integration of AR into real physical spaces, so that the audience can actually feel the story being told. And there's a few examples that Astuce has shown us where and I think you saw some of the samples there, where the bar graph, if you're talking about scale or numbers or budgets or results, what have you, that they can literally lift out of the physical space to tell the story and elevate it so that people are still connected to the information and not just distracted by the technology of it. But it was an intentional move for us to keep it simple, so that when we have something like an election or a major news event, we can put all of our investment there, and day in, day out have a very clean, consistent, and the other thing about our content right now is incredibly portable into digital. A lot of the graphics that we have on our nightly newscast are being dropped right into Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where we're seeing a lot of growth without any mediation through a reporter voiceover or anything, which is why I showed you that shockingly simple piece of video of an air traffic control incident, which did incredibly well for us on shares and social, and we played that in our flagship newscast without any reporter talking it through for the audience, and there weren't any complaints about that either.
And are you taking, are you taking a graphic? I know you have a lot of video walls, so Selena mentioned that on the news set, and those aren't cheap. I realize, there has been a move in the U.S. and a lot of stations to use video walls heavily as a graphic display, and it seems like maybe it's shifting back a little bit because AR is proving so successful, and virtual sets are getting easier to use. But will you actually take the exact same graphic from one of those panels and you're immediately able to pop it on a phone, or are there formatting issues that you're still doing?
Yeah, there are certainly formatting issues, because one of the issues in our news studio is, because if I had this future world where everything was portable figured out, that'd be wonderful, but we're talking about a small scale, maybe 20% that's portable directly in terms of what the full screen graphics are, and we can pump them out just with a different output, and they work fine. For a lot of the work we're doing in our video walls, we've got 5 main vertical towers that you may have seen in that demo reel, and that's all actually we worked with Astuce in terms of working through viz engines that could power them, so we're dropping in a lot of still imagery very easily. And the fundamental look of the new National is actually, this is something you see on your iPhone every day, is blurring. So we actually have no color palette, there's no graphic logo or look, everything's black and white and blurred editorial imagery. So every single day the show opens with a different 28 photos that are run through a viz template to create the show opening, and it's images from that day with the date. And then those images populate, powered through viz and powered through our lineup, those images populate the video walls. And after they are revealed, they immediately blur, and that allows for the background for all of our anchors.
Okay, thanks. Now, Andy, you said you were in early on the virtual set game, BBC development. As you look at the technology that's available from vendors today, what's been the biggest improvement that makes these sets look a lot more realistic? Is it, where's it? You obviously have different parts of the rendering, the camera tracking technology, but maybe you can.
It's a lot of bits. I mean, fundamentally, the power of the compute, the ability to render. We actually, on our big election sets, we take it beyond where they go and then bring it back. The ability to have the speed in the computer to give you very good render, it becomes more photorealistic. We're never going to get to CGI because we'll never quite get that quality because you haven't got the time, but it is getting better, and the power of the computer is definitely there, and the quality of the tracking. If you look at some of the companies, if you look at the Scottish, that was done by a company called Skype, very cheap. Anybody, I think it's about $16,000 roughly to buy their really basic setup, and it's really good and it's really accurate. They've got, and they've got some other new fantastic stuff coming on. So it is accessible. The price is coming down, the quality is going up. So, and that AR stuff, I say, was just done with Skype.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, this summer at our office, we built out our own studio, with Stipe, our own Jimmy Jib, camera switcher, the lighting grid, the works. So we've got our own virtual studio that we can play with the sets, because as the technologies are evolving, as they're getting better, like you said, the camera tracking has gotten very good, so you have minimal lag. Whereas some of the stuff that we're doing now and we're taking for granted, you couldn't do a few years ago, just because those delays when you did the camera moves were just unacceptable for TV. So now with our own studio, you're right, it's affordable. We can build these things out, we can play with it, and it's evolving so quickly. And there's so many new players in the market, and we'll probably eventually talk about some of the Unreal game engine stuff as well. There's just so much more happening. It's advancing rapidly. It's important to be on top of it.
Yeah.
And I know, because we spoke about it for a story. Tell the audience what your major goal with creating that set was. Actually preview stuff, right? You can talk about like creating graphics virtual set and having a customer be able to visualize it.
I think and I'm sure, the BBC, with their experience, they have some very talented presenters that are incredibly comfortable with it. Presenter buy-in is absolutely mandatory for a lot of these AR elements. It's the same kind of thing we've seen in the Hollywood blockbusters, where an actor that doesn't get the fact that all of the world is going to be built around them, it comes off as, you know, a little flat. Well, the same thing is happening in broadcast studios, and you must be experiencing it daily. That buy-in is important, and if you show them a preview on the monitor at the graphic artist station, and you say, well, here's a mock-up of what we've built, and this is what it'll look like, imagine yourself there, it doesn't feel it. And with AR and virtual sets, you need to feel it. It's a very emotional connection. It's odd, but once you see it all come together, it kind of works. And so by having our own studio, it's a place where you can experiment with it, play with it, and sort of get into it and say, I got it. And then there's sort of a magic click that can happen, and you can say, well, what if we expand it this way? What if the infographic went there? Would that be better to tell the story? Because it all comes down to, well, how does it augment the story?
It's really, really important to take your talent with you, and having talent who understand it and can work with you in it is really important, because if they're not convinced, the audience won't be convinced.
Exactly.
Right. And in my experience down in Jacksonville, one of the most important things that we do is we do use it every day. So we've got muscle memory that's now instilled, and it's now second nature for them to walk onto that green screen, a talent that they did not possess less than a year ago, and now they don't think twice about it. We go live from the virtual set every day.
And when you were initially integrating it, Victor, and setting it up and getting the cameras calibrated and all that, how easy was that? And how easy is it, because you are using it on a day-to-day basis? How is it from an operator perspective to drive the thing?
It's not as hard as you might think. We don't have the resources of the other gentlemen here on the stage, so our pre-built set is while it's virtual, it is still very much a hard set. It can do so many things. We can drop in some AR elements to customize it, and we do that fairly regularly. But it does the same thing every day. So we go through the same patterns every day. We'll go through, our opens will be similar, and and again, that's not too. We're still kind of growing up with this. We're still very new to this. We're still very young. I've got very young people running this. I've got kids right out of college who are by themselves on a weekend running this system. So the more that they can do this over and over and over again and become more and more familiar, more comfortable, the better off we are. And then once we get to that point, the more we can stretch our wings to an extent.
Michael, you mentioned data-driven graphics before, and integrations with those for your mobile and digital platforms. Can you talk about, just from editorial level, how much easier has it gotten, or how challenging maybe is it still to have heavily data intensive things like election results, financial indices, and integrate that and make it easy? Because one of the things I talked with Selena about you guys weren't creating a virtual set, but it sounded like you had an intensive project when you went to VisRT in a template-based environment to be able to make that stuff work automatically. Can you talk about that?
Elections are more complicated technically, but they have an entire operation around them that allow the workflow to be, it's very event-driven. You run through rehearsals. The kinds of data that you're going to have that's going to drive a series of results. You get the host familiar with things and excited about things. And I'm very interested in that you do this day in, day out, because what we're shifting to with our new approach to graphics is to allowing much more storytelling, and the movement from the journalism and the storytelling into the hands of the graphic artists is happening so quickly. To the point right now where we really have to start to think about the story teams, and this is something that we're looking at. We've moved to a much more centralized system and a more story-centered system in our newsrooms, because a lot of times the reporter was the glue for a lot of the information in our stories, and the graphics were the extra thing that were used as an intro, or a host was presenting it. And as we move into using these graphics in a much more portable way for digital, the reporter is often removed from the equation. I'm sure you've all experienced it in newsrooms where you take something and you take a voiceover out, or you take a script away, and it needs to stand on its own because people are consuming it just for its information and the proximity to the story. So we're moving in a direction of how do you take complex stories and move them through the system so you're creating these outputs of explaining what happened with the attack this morning here in New York without it being mediated through a reporter, and that's in the hands of a producer or a graphics artist who very quickly have to make sense of it. And so it's changing the workflow behind the scenes, and it's not without its serious bumps, because there is just the human nature of people wanting their face and voice and name to be connected to the content. But what we're learning that's best for the audience, and we're seeing a lot of data coming back as we look at what people are using in terms of graphics. They don't need it told through somebody else. They just want the information very quietly told to them, because they're predominantly, of course, looking at it in mobile.
One of the things that's mentioned as a challenge for some people in launching a virtual set is creating all the backgrounds, and some people probably have, I imagine the BBC, you have a massive graphics department, I would imagine.
It's not that massive, no. But it's a central graphics department which actually runs across everything which we do.
So when you did virtual set environments or AR, did you farm it out to somebody who specialized in that, or were you able to create the environments yourself?
We have our own inboard team actually who work on it, and they're quite talented because they not only do the creation but and some of the guys like Tony actually can do a lot of the coding as well. So we managed to, with the elections, actually have, you know, the sort of the joystick things you have for flying games. We actually managed to couple that to the VR, so we actually have a mobile camera, so he could actually fly that camera through what he wanted to do. So we have a really good talent who enables some quite creative storytelling ideas.
Victor, how did you handle graphics creation, creating the original environment for the set when you launched it?
It was a little bit of trial and error, but we did it in-house, working, we're a Tegna station, so working with our Tegna graphics in Denver. We engaged one of our graphic artists who was skilled in Cinema 4D, and we had a little bit of trial and error. I think the initial set that we got was about the size of a warehouse, and virtually. And so that didn't quite work out. So we actually brought back and scaled the room back down, and did some simple chroma key tests and shot it that way, and just to check it out, and that's what we came to. And you'll see that's essentially the same room where those multiple virtual sets are that we're talking about. They're just different skins.
Okay. And Thomas, maybe you could just weigh in to the extent you guys do create virtual set environments for your customers. How does that work?
Well, because we're a creative services provider, so we work with the broadcasters and with the technology platform that they have. So we try and be, fairly agnostic. We have our preferences, and some systems are a bit easier to do data-driven graphics than others, but we really work with their systems to get that going. Similar to what you were saying, some of the skills on your team, our team is sort of half software developers and half creative services. So we really are able to bring some of that technical know-how and that integration to bring in, live data for complex events. You were talking about financial information or live sporting events, so we really have that know-how, as well as on the creative side to work with them. So it really depends on the customer. In some cases we can feed in elements, and in some cases they ask us to really bring in more of an overview, and whether it's tweaking or a full package, we can really work with them. It varies.
We only have a couple minutes left, and I see Harry has a mic in his hand, so I don't know if he has a question or somebody else has a question. Say question for somebody else.
I got a question. There you go, sir. A question for Michael. Pardon me. You've already alluded to this. I was wondering what kind of pushback, or did you receive pushback from the talent for not being part of certain pieces, and from the designers who aren't doing shiny, moving objects?
Well, the good news on the talent front is we just named 4 new people hosts of the national newscast, so they're all happy with us right now because they got the job. So we'll see where we're at in another 6 months once they're all settled into it. I mean, we have an overriding philosophy right now with a major change project that we're leading, that things are really story first and connected to journalism and technology that supports it, not technology that leads it. And I think that's the balance that we're all talking about here. And what's happened in the news industry in the last year or so with all of the trust issues, actually, I think have emboldened a lot of our presenters to embrace a new approach to, as I was saying before, not having to be in the way of everything that they're doing. So they've actually been pretty great because they are driven by the quality of their work, and that's their brand and what they're associated with. It's been a challenge for our graphic artists. The criticism when we went to this incredibly simple style just 1 month ago was, well, you're just putting print on TV. And that was you're not using the full extent of our skills. We can do so much more than what you're allowing. And my answer to that would be, let's put all of your energy into special projects and things that are going to have impact and potentially be evergreen for several days or weeks or imagine months. And day in, day out, we can have the much more simple workflow so that they have those great point of pride projects. And we just launched one. We just launched a 3-minute 360 video that reenacts something from 100 years ago in Canadian history. That's incredible. That we saw huge traffic with, and now the artists are proud because they're seeing, oh, if we get to work on things like that, then we're okay with the fact that you're essentially putting print on TV.
Any other questions from the audience?
Just one comment I just want to jump in with that sort of to play on Michael's comment about sort of moving away from the AR, VR, and some of the stuff we saw in Andy's demo reel with these big projections on the side of the Parliament building. In the demo reel that we showed, there was some footage of Times Square, and some of the people that saw that initially thought that we were using maybe a spider or some clever masking to make it look like we were covering the Times Square screens, but that was a project where we moved away from the virtual and made it real because the story itself was big, and it was a very New York way to do that, and it's something just felt very ABC about that, to be able to take over those screens and make it real. There was nothing virtual about that, and there's times where that giant screen just conveys that message a bit better than a virtually big screen.
Yeah. It's quite. We a couple of years ago launched doing a very big projection on if everybody's familiar with Broadcasting House in London, the big bow. We started doing a big projection on there from the Langham Hotel. This year, actually, a couple of foreign broadcasts actually set up camp. But I think I could have said, and they had that as their backdrop. And those big screens are really, really important. Whether you're doing it at Times Square, whether we're doing it in London. I could have made a fortune to say, find this service charge, guys. Come on.
Next year. Well, anyway, our time is up. I'd like to thank our panelists for great videos and a great discussion. Thanks.